One evening, after watching a horror movie at the cinema, I returned home. The film was filled with dark and disturbing scenes, but I usually wasn't affected by horror movies. However, this film was different. The scenes were so realistic and chilling that I felt a strange unease even while watching it. When I got home, I noticed that some of the scenes from the movie were replaying in my mind. Normally, I don't get affected by these kinds of things, but this time was different. I tried to stop thinking about the movie when I got to my room, but as the night went on, the unsettling scenes had a stronger impact. Before going to bed, I turned off all the lights in my room. I lay down on my bed and closed my eyes. However, the images from the film were still haunting me. Suddenly, I heard a faint hissing sound coming from a corner of the room. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't see anything in the room. Maybe I was exaggerating the sound under the influence of the horror movie. However, a few minutes later, the hissing sound came again. This time, it sounded more distinct and closer. My heart started racing. With great effort, I mustered the courage to get out of bed and look around the room, but I still couldn't see anything. I timidly returned to the bed and closed my eyes again, but this time I heard a faint hissing sound coming from under the bed. I slowly opened my eyes and looked under the bed, but I couldn't see anything there. However, I was filled with fear. The evil characters from the movie made it feel like they were following me in the real world. My heart pounding out of my chest, I suddenly noticed movement in the corner of my room. I looked quickly, and I saw a shadow-like figure moving on the wall. I froze, and my breath caught in my throat. This shadow was as unsettling as the scenes from the movie, and I was drenched in sweat, overwhelmed by fear. Suddenly, the lights in my room flickered on. The sudden brightness blinded me, and the shadow disappeared. At that moment, I let out a sigh of relief. Maybe I was scaring myself under the influence of the horror movie, or perhaps it was just my imagination. But that night, I believed that the scenes from the movie had seeped into my real world. After the terrifying experience I had that night, I decided to see a doctor early in the morning. I believed that the scenes from the movie had affected me, and I understood that it could have a psychological impact. After speaking with the doctor, they explained that what I had experienced was the result of the movie affecting my mind, and that I was going through temporary anxiety. With the treatment methods recommended by the doctor, I started to reduce the disturbing thoughts associated with the movie and began to relax. I worked on meditation, deep breathing techniques, and focusing on positive thoughts to regain mental balance. Additionally, I was advised not to watch more horror movies. Over time, with the help of treatment and my own efforts, the effects of the horror-filled night began to diminish. My anxiety levels decreased, and my nights became more peaceful. This experience taught me how thin the line between reality and imagination can be. In the end, I recovered my health after the terrifying moments I had experienced. With the guidance of the doctor and my own determination, I gained control over my fears related to the movie. I was walking in a dimly lit hospital corridor, glancing at other weary and worried family members of patients. The fact that my loved one was in the intensive care unit weighed heavily on my heart. They had been hospitalized a few days ago due to a sudden accident. The doctors had explained the severity of the situation and the risks involved, yet they still hadn't woken up. Every day I would enter their room, holding their hand tightly, and speak to them. Maybe they could hear my voice, maybe they could feel it. I didn't know. All I knew was that seeing them lying there affected me deeply. One night, the hospital's silence enveloped the hallways. I was gazing at the full moon through a window at the end of the corridor. I needed to leave the room, so I entered their room one last time. I sat down by their bedside and spoke softly. Suddenly I felt a gentle breeze, as if a hand had touched my shoulder. My eyes darted around the room, but there was no one there. The room remained silent and empty. At that moment, I got goosebumps. While I tried to rationalize my thoughts, there was an odd sense of unease within me. I left the room and walked down the corridor. But even there, I felt that something strange was happening, like a shadow passing swiftly in the corner of my eye. A few more days passed, and my loved one's condition remained unchanged. One evening, I entered their room again. I began to speak, and once more I felt that breeze, but this time it was more intense. I slightly illuminated the room and looked around. Suddenly I noticed that the curtain next to the window was moving ever so slightly. I fixed my gaze on the curtain and saw what seemed like a hand slowly pulling it. My heart began to race, but I couldn't resist the curiosity to look behind the curtain. As I did, a silhouette appeared. It was tall and slender, but its face was indistinct. Trembling with fear, I took a step back. At that moment, a sudden light flooded the room. Everything became illuminated, and the silhouette disappeared. A nurse explained that she had turned on the room's light, but I couldn't forget what I had seen and felt. Perhaps my loved one by my side was trying to communicate with me in some way. A few days later, my loved one's condition worsened. When they took their last breath, a sudden gloom descended upon the room, and I went through a deeply sorrowful time that I can't forget. That night, we had gathered at home with our friends. Among us, there was a sense of curiosity and excitement. Halloween was approaching, and we wanted to spend this night in a different and unforgettable way. As we sat in the dimly lit living room, someone suddenly asked, "Shall we try summoning spirits?" At first, I wasn't enthusiastic about the idea, but others seemed curious and excited. In the end, we decided to try a spirit summoning experiment together. One of our friends began to describe a ritual they had found in an old book. They explained that we needed to place incense in the center, light a candle, and sit in the room quietly, following the instructions in the book. We prepared to perform the ritual correctly. We drew a circle in the middle of the living room and placed the candle inside it. After lighting the incense, we quietly recited the instructions from the book. The room suddenly fell into silence, and we began to wait. At first, nothing happened. We only observed the incense smoke slowly rising. However, the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. It felt like a heaviness had emerged. The incense smoke seemed to thicken. The expressions on everyone's faces became more serious, and we felt uneasy. The first sound to break the silence sent shivers down our spines. A faint and trembling whisper was heard. At first we couldn't tell whose voice it was, but it was coming from all corners of the room. It was as if the air around us had cooled. The incense smoke started forming shapes, and strange shadows seemed to dance on the walls. Suddenly the flame of the candle began to flicker, giving us the sensation of being in a windy place. My friends' faces turned pale, and we were frozen in fear. The whispers became increasingly distinct, but they didn't convey any meaningful message. In a panic, we decided to extinguish the incense and turn on the lights. We fled the room just before the candle's flame wavered and went out. From that moment on, everything returned to normal, but the eerie experience we had stayed with us for a long time. After that night, we realized that summoning spirits could have serious consequences. We couldn't determine whether the event was real or a collective imagination, but the chilling atmosphere we experienced left a lasting impression on us. We made a pact never to attempt such an experience again. That night would remain an unforgettable memory for us as we celebrated Halloween.